there, Falcons. Great to have you here for the last episode of Tune In Tuesday. We've really enjoyed having you tune in each week and being able to share a variety of topics throughout the semester. Today, we're joined by recent alums that have navigated the transition from college to career during COVID. They're going to share more about their experience with us. So thanks, and let's get started. Hey Falcons, here we are. It's our last episode of Tune In Tuesday for the semester, and I am thrilled to be joined with three of my favorite recent alums. And today we are going to process their transition from college to career. But friends, it didn't just happen in normal times. They all had to do it during COVID. So today we're going to unpack what that experience was like, and they're going to offer up some advice of what they experienced. So let's kick it off with some introductions. Allie, why don't you go first?
Sounds good. Thanks, McKenna. Hi, my name is Allie Slaughter. I graduated in 2019, and I am currently working as a program performance specialist with Employ Prince George's. And I support federal workforce grants for Prince George County, working primarily with youth workforce providers in training, data management, and program monitoring.
That's a lot.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Erikas Robertson. I am an associate territory manager with Pioneer Seeds, and I'm in a training program that supports Eastern Minnesota and Northern Wisconsin, and I'm currently based out of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin.
My name is Eric Byerly, and I just graduated this past semester, December 2020, and I am working at US Bank full-time as a credit risk business intelligence reporting, and essentially just, building data visual dashboards. So nothing, complicated here, so.
Oh, yeah, right. I'd walk into your job, sit down in the chair and be like, okay, that's as far as I can get. Now what do I do? Just kidding. Okay. I would be curious to hear from each of you how you found your current positions.
I found my current position actually on the LinkedIn job search.
I found my current position as I was an intern for the same company, Pioneer, for 2 summers prior to starting the training program. So at the end of my second summer, which would have been 2 summers ago, I applied for the training program and then had a job coming out of college last spring in May.
Yeah, echoing Erica, that was similar to my experience. Essentially, I had a return offer for my second summer, and so I kind of kept the same one I had for my second summer to full time. But other than that, it was similar to Allie. Just LinkedIn was where I found it initially for internships.
Okay, folks. LinkedIn, networking, and internships are the 3 themes that I just heard. So write that down, Falcons. Okay, first question. Eric, I want to start with you for this one. During COVID, what has your daily work arrangement been? Are you fully remote, hybrid, in person, on a day-to-day basis? Where are you?
Yeah, so for me, I'm remotely at my house in Stillwater, Minnesota, where my job is based in the Twin Cities, so not far from River Falls at all. And I guess my timeline with COVID and everything, it's uncertain kind of when my return to office will be. But when I do return, I expect to kind of probably do some sort of hybrid model, because I do actually like working from home.
Nice. And then what about Allie and Erica?
I can hop in a little bit on this one. So my situation is it's kind of a field role. So normally outside of COVID, I still have a home office, but I just kind of live out of a work truck and I'm constantly traveling. So It's pretty much business as usual for me, with the exception of there's a lot less in-person meetings, so there's just a lot more Zoom calls. So less time on the road for those kind of things, but still able to meet outside and in the field with different farmers.
And my situation is similar to Eric. I am fully remote at the moment and no current plan to return to the office.
Okay, so with the remote work that all three of you are experiencing, are there any tips that you would offer up to our soon-to-be May graduates on strategies you've used to be successful in that environment?
I guess my main advice would be is when I had my offer letter for my internship to full-time is that I had some questions. So I just reached out to my manager or boss. And I think that's like really important because then you kind of have more peace of mind of kind of what to expect coming out of undergrad. And I guess as well, like your manager wants you to succeed and like they want you to come back. Like that's why you got the offer. And so they're more willing to help you. HR is just kind of like, give you the kind of wants you to kind of say yay or nay. So your manager is kind of your go-to person. Other than that, I think just having kind of figuring out what systems didn't work in undergrad and kind of fixing those for full-time because you have more free time than maybe at least from my experience. So I think those two are like my main two tips.
I would agree on, finding what works for you for organization. For me, I continued some of like my best organization practices from undergrad and took that to the workplace. So for me, that's to-do lists and using my calendar, and I've continued using that a lot in work, and that helps me just schedule out my own day since I don't have, anyone else around me. I also think something that's really important is to early on when you start your job, establish that work-life balance. That can be really hard when your office is in your home, in your kitchen or in your bedroom. And so making sure, that you know how to like separate when you log off at the end of the day, unless there's an emergency maybe, that you don't touch your work phone or your open up your email at the end of the day, and make sure that you give yourself some time to relax and not look at work.
I'd add one more thing. Totally agree with what Allie just said, that work-life balance is huge. Sometimes you can feel guilty when you're working from home that you're not spending enough time doing something, especially if you're in a salaried position that's not hourly. That's how mine is, but I know people that are hourly feel the same thing, but just really making sure you are taking that time to set the computer down and not touching your phone and just allowing yourself to breathe. One other thing that I think is really important from my experience is having a lot more Zoom meetings and not being able to interact with people in person at different meetings, because sometimes that would be the only person or only time you get to see those people. Maybe it's even just in an office setting, just really making sure you're prioritizing communication. And even if it's just picking up the phone and calling your coworker or manager, even if you feel like it's a silly question, normally you just be able to look over at your cubicle or whatever and just ask it. So they want to hear from you, and it's an opportunity to strengthen and build those relationships too that you would normally be getting in person. So I think that's been really helpful for me.
Great advice. I remember when we came home, I'm such a people person that, you get to see people in meetings, but it's different. The meeting would start and there wasn't that casual chit chat at the beginning of the meeting like there typically would be. And then when the meeting would get done, you'd have to hop into the next meeting. And so I started having to make cold calls on using Microsoft Teams to my different work contacts to just be like, how are you? Because I was craving that casual conversation. So all great strategies. Allie, I'm going to direct this next question to you. As you began your current position, what was the training and the onboarding process like? Was it facilitated remote? And what did it consist of?
For me, everything was remote, which was certainly a very new process. My supervisor set up a comprehensive training plan, and at first it was, really intensive. We would meet most days and go over things, and she'd have me, train with other coworkers. And we've continued to do training sessions through my whole time. I also set up meetings with other departments that I was going to work closely with, to have a chance to get to know them and understand how my role would interact with theirs. And then I think it's a really strange feeling to learn a new job at any time, whether you're in person or remote, but remote is certainly different. And so I think something that's really important with that, if people are looking to start jobs that are going to remain remote, is to give yourself some time to get used to the new job. There's always a learning curve, no matter how you're being onboarded, but giving yourself the time and the grace to just get used to the job and not feel like you have to be doing something 24/7. Maybe it's reading, a training guide, or looking at the website to understand your role more thoroughly.
Was everybody else's onboarding experience also facilitated in a virtual manner? Okay.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to mine. Normally, we would have a week-long in-person training at our company headquarters in either Johnston, Iowa, or Indianapolis, Indiana, with kind of our training program cohort. But we had to do that over Zoom this year, so it was definitely different. But they're definitely finding creative ways to still make it interactive over Zoom in a virtual setting.
Erica, in that capacity, do you feel like you were able to develop relationships with the other quote unquote cohort members that you were with?
For sure. That kind of leads into, I think, our kind of next topic of discussion too, but it definitely makes it more challenging because I've never actually met any of my cohort face to face. My only interactions with them have been over the phone or texting or through Zoom. So it definitely is hard. But that just emphasizes the importance of not being afraid to pick up the phone, because like you're all going through the same thing. If you have somebody that starts with you at the same time, like most of us have the same questions. And if you're not asking it, somebody else is thinking it. So just not being afraid to hop on the phone and just say, hey, like, how are you getting through this specific scenario is just really key.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, it's similar to Erica's, the onboarding experience. We have like a cohort for people that graduated in December for January, but there's cohort people that start in June. So they have a January and June cohort, but I know some people from my first summer that are in that cohort. And so I kind of know people from both. So it's nice to have some young faces because my team is a lot older. And so we have like a few kind of sessions during each quarter to kind of get acclimated with things at US Bank, but also just essential things like goal setting and like prioritizing like tasks that you have for day to day. So I find that really helpful. I think other than that, I mean, I had like the typical corporate IT, tech issues, but you get through those the first few days and then it's kind of smooth sailing after that.
Sure. Yeah. Technology is great when it works, right? And we've reinforced that message all the way through COVID. Okay, so Erica, let's go back to kind of the connection piece. So we all know from our time even at River Falls, having those people that you connect with is really important to that sense of fulfillment. So I'm curious how you've been able to engage with colleagues in your departments to build relationships, but then people outside of your department as well.
For sure. So as I said, it's definitely been a challenge, whereas normally if you're in an office setting or when you're constantly going to meetings, you'd be seeing these people on a pretty frequent basis, and it can be a little bit isolating when you're not able to do that. I'm myself fortunate enough that I'm able to be in a field role where sometimes I'm able to still see the ones who live close by if we're meeting in an outdoor setting. But if you don't have that opportunity, it's just really important, like you said, to still somehow find a way to get that human interaction. And one thing that I found is really helpful with kind of going back to our little cohort that I was talking about, we've started to do these either monthly or sometimes twice a month virtual happy hours in the evening. So we'll just pick a night and put it on everybody's calendar, and we just spend like an hour to 2 hours just talking about life and catching up. And that has been so helpful because even though I haven't been able to meet very many of them in person, it makes you feel like you know them. Like you can still learn a lot from somebody about Zoom. So that's been incredibly helpful for me. Another thing that I would just echo, when it is safe, or if you have the opportunity to kind of shadow people in person from other departments. I know I've done that from previous internships, like even if it's just spending half a day going to just learn more what somebody else in the company does, it can be so huge. I know even in the COVID virtual setting, I've even just picked up the phone and said, hey, can we schedule a Zoom call? I would just love to learn a little bit more about what you do, pick your brain over 30 minutes. And most people are more than happy to share their experiences with you. So that's something I would definitely encourage and recommend, just to get more connected in your workplace within your department and outside of it.
That's nice. Good advice. Anybody else?
I guess,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. I guess for me, I'm just like, I reached out to people that I had met over the summers and just kind of touch base and been like, hey, I'm here, kind of like would love to like touch base later on, kind of once I'm getting more settled in, to kind of let you know how the job's going and just kind of reconnect, because I know during like the work week it can just be kind of work, work, work. So trying to throw in some time, whether it's just kind of casual coffee chats over Zoom, is really helpful. And I think also a few people kind of suggested maybe, you know, some sort of like social distancing, like coffee thing at the end of the workday, like mid-afternoon. I was like, yeah, I think like I'd be open to that sort of thing. So I think it's just kind of reinventing the wheel of how we're connecting with our coworkers. And I think that's kind of the cool thing about it. So,
But making sure that we prioritize it too, because if we don't build it in, our projects can kind of take over, and before you know it, the week's over, and something like that is easy to slip through the cracks if you don't make it a priority. So I think it's really cool that the two of you have made that a priority so far in your process. So that's great. Eric, what are some strategies you've used to immerse yourself in the work culture? I'm particularly interested in starting with you just because US Bank is so large.
yeah, so I guess the main thing that I've always been told and recommended to do is, obviously there's plenty of mentors to connect with at US Bank. And so there's a Mentor Connect platform. And so that can be like a similar to like a info session sort of dynamic where you meet like 1 or 2 times, or kind of more of a long-term kind of thing, as well as business resource groups are really great. So there's like a women in kind of a women's group, different, you know, like a pride group and things like that. There's a development one. I've also just started reaching out to try to get some sort of young professionals one developed, just because of COVID and everything. It's really hard for young people, even people that just are new to an organization as big as US Bank, to connect with people. So I've been trying to kind of get that started as well, and just kind of immerse myself that way. And other than that, there is like plenty of resources and such. But I think just the main one is the business resource groups, just because that allows you to connect with people across the company. And there's plenty of events to kind of just throw on your calendar that are like less than an hour long. So
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because in a previous Tune In Tuesday episode, when we were reflecting on the lessons of the year, a couple employers brought up the business resource group. So it's nice to see that theme kind of come through again, but they're awesome. And Falcons, if you didn't catch the previous episode, a business resource group is essentially a student organization for adults in the workplace. So themed out just the way student organizations are, but then it's a chance to connect, and sometimes events are facilitated through those. So yeah, great suggestion. Anybody else have other strategies they've executed to connect with the workplace culture?
For me, it was a completely new workplace. You know, I hadn't didn't have an internship here or anything beforehand. And so everything was very new. So that was challenging at the beginning, but I think just taking some time to really understand the workplace and the culture by, again, looking at the website. My workplace has a podcast, so listening to that. We have Teams channels where people will talk about what's going on in their lives, what's their new favorite show that they're watching. And so again, making that a priority to get to know people and the culture. And, I think we try to keep some of those daily interactions going, always saying good morning on Teams and hoping everyone has a good weekend, those sort of comments that just help keep that connection.
For sure. Echoing kind of what Allie just said to you about even like just making sure you're still bonding with your team. Like I know something for the team that I work closest with, it's about 10 people. And even though we don't get to see each other in person that often, we always make it a point to acknowledge birthdays, big life events like engagements, anniversaries, it's a work anniversary, or maybe somebody had a baby. Just, it really keeps kind of that culture just positive and alive. And I think it's just so important. Like, I think it can go easily unnoticed, but it really means a lot. So if nobody in your immediate team is doing that, maybe you could be the one to start that, because it really makes people's days.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Allie, what parts of your transition from college to career were the smoothest? And then I also want to examine the flip side of what were the most challenging.
Yeah, great question. I'm actually going to start with the challenging aspect first. I think, college is exhausting in its own ways between late night studying and being involved in lots of things, but a 40-hour work week is exhausting in a very different way. And I think it caught me by surprise, and I've heard from others that it's always surprising too. Sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day can be exhausting. And so that transition for me was tough, just moving from a very different schedule, having the same thing every day for the most part, and just having weekends off. That was a big transition. And so my advice on that aspect would be to recognize that and give yourself some time. I think like after my first couple of weeks of work, I slept for like an entire day that weekend just to like catch up and make sure I was ready to keep going. So giving yourself some time on that to make that transition, just in terms of how your time is spent. For the smoothest, I would say for me, I really encourage people to do internships throughout their time in college. I think that helped make my transition very smooth, in the sense that I understood what it meant to be in a workplace, especially if you're doing a summer internship and you have the chance to be full-time, you sort of get a sense of how that all works. So for me, having those experiences in college made transitioning to being a full-time employee a lot smoother.
Sure. Who wants to go next?
I can share a little bit. I definitely share a lot of Allie's comments on both the challenges and some of the things that went the smoothest. So I can start with the challenges too. For me, I found myself kind of very quickly falling into kind of the work rut almost a little bit, because it is such a big transition. In college, like you have class, but then, your evenings are usually pretty free, or afternoons, and usually they're filled with lots of student organizations, or you're trying to balance work, or maybe it's, it's intramural sport, or lots of just different things. And there's always something to kind of fill that time. But in kind of when you get into the working world, sometimes it can be kind of boring. Like you work all day, you come home, you make dinner, you clean up. Maybe you get a workout in and you kind of go to bed, and that's reality. And I don't know how people do it with kids, man. Like that'd be tough. McKenna, you're going to have to give us some advice there, but
just don't.
It can be really easy.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
It can be really easy to fall into a rut. And I found myself being like, okay, I don't want to live like this. Like, what do I need to do? And just really that time, like, okay, I need to spend 20 minutes on the phone with a friend in the evening, or call my sister, or pick up a hobby, honestly. Like, I think COVID brought a lot of that's out in it, but in college, I kind of stopped reading for fun. Just picking that up again, making time for the things you never used to have time for, can really just kind of help fill that void, I think is really huge. And I always thought it was lame when people told me that, find a hobby. And I'm like, oh, come on. But it is so important.
I would echo kind of a lot of what was said already, but I think for me, I just want to bring this one forward for, I think the most challenging. I think for me, I kind of immersed myself in like the learning process and just like the routine of doing school. I think it was kind of like I had that moment lull of like, what's like my purpose now? Like I'm just like, I've done like the K-12, I've done like school like all my life, and kind of like had that beaten into like my brain. And to kind of like, you know, what Erica said, kind of like pick up hobbies and things like that again. I think that was really the hardest for me, is that like, oh, I can relax and like I don't have to worry about all these assignments on like in the evenings to complete. Like I can read, like I can, you know, FaceTime a friend. I think that's kind of also, I think, the smooth part as well, just because I think for me, just having to do online school for the last year, for my last 2 semesters, I kind of got used to just kind of the virtual dynamic of that. And so going into the workplace being all virtual to start, it wasn't kind of out of the ordinary. And I guess also where I'll be working when the return to office does happen, I have interned there my first summer, just the next building over. So I think some of those kind of worries about some of the work stuff was not as challenging, but I think just more of the work-life balance and kind of what I do outside of work, I think was the most challenging, and kind of how to realign kind of what I do next.
In college, I remember back in my transition 100 years ago, I would get home from work and be like, okay, now what? And look around. I was living by myself, and it was like, I'm sorry, it's 6 o'clock. And you're just so used to having to go, one thing right after the other, that now in the work world, it's like, wait, this is it? So when does the second shift start?
And then you add in COVID too, and staying at home all the time, and it's a whole nother level.
Right. And seeing the same 4 walls over and over again. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so kind of in the same vein of what we've been talking about, and Erica, I'm going to start with you on this one, but what advice would you offer specifically to our May graduates? Are there things that they should be doing now to help them make this transition? But then again, in general, just any advice for our May grads?
For sure. I would say trying to get as many things kind of solidified before kind of the big transition was really helpful for me. So I was fortunate enough to, like I said, have a job lined up prior to graduation, but that takes such a huge stress load off your back if you can have that already kind of figured out, and your place to live, and if you need to get the vehicle situation figured out, like just kind of getting all those ducks in a row before you make the move. That way you're not trying to adjust to 1,000 different things at once. That's really huge. And once you kind of have that all laid out, one thing I wish I would have made it more of a point to do, and it can be difficult obviously in this COVID world we're living in, but just making it a point to try to get involved in some kind of organization or group, you know, whatever that looks like, if it's just really social distanced or if it's virtual. That's something I didn't do, and I found it pretty isolating when I initially moved and relocated, just because I really didn't know anybody or didn't have any friends or family nearby. But I wish I would have tried to get involved in a church or some kind of volunteer group just to do something. And I wish I would have researched that more ahead of time. So that's something I would really encourage, that I think is really important. And then in addition to picking up the hobbies and things like that, the last thing I would really encourage is just to really maintain open communication with your manager and supervisor on how the heck you're doing. And, you know, even if it's scheduling just a 10-minute phone call once a week, just to say, hey, this is what I'm really struggling with this week, or this adjustment's really hard, because everybody's been there, they understand, and they can maybe offer some tips, or maybe they know somebody that's in the area that can help you. So I think just really making a point to be open with your coworkers and manager is really important.
For sure, especially when asked, oh, how are you doing? So routinely in our society, the answer to that question that we give is, oh, I'm fine, everything's good. But to be authentic in that answer, especially during that transition, is really important.
For sure. Because I know just from personal experience, because before I mentioned earlier, now I'm in Chippewa Falls, but prior to that, I was in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and I really didn't know anybody there. And that was really hard. And I remember one of the first couple of weeks on the job, you know, at first, the first few weeks are kind of just a blur because you're just drinking out of a fire hose a little bit. But once things calm down and like you just said, McKenna, when somebody asks you, how are you doing? And I remember kind of saying, you know what? I'm actually really having a hard time. Like, this is pretty difficult for me. And I just feel a little bit isolated and lost and confused. And we were able to sit down and have a really good life chat. And she's like, okay, what do you need from me? How can I support you? And from there, we really scheduled like, okay, every Thursday morning from 8 to 8:30, we're just going to have a check-in and talk. And that really helped because sometimes things just get away from you. Everybody's got busy schedules. So that really helps. It's kind of your own mini therapy session, but I think we all need that.
Absolutely. Anybody else have additional advice that they would offer to our May grads?
I would echo a lot of what was said already, but I think also just kind of understanding how your manager kind of operates in terms of like how he manages, because I know mine's very like hands off, and for me, you know, I worked a bunch of retail jobs through undergrad, and so a lot of those are micromanaged. So I think that was a big adjustment. So just know that I think 9 times out of 10 with a full-time job out of school, you're going to have a lot more freedom in what you're doing. And so to kind of allow yourself to kind of learn and fall, and you know, your team of the first year is going to be really understanding that you're new on the job and you're going to make mistakes, but making mistakes early on is huge, because then that's where you grow the most as well.
Off of that, I think having the confidence too when you start a new job, to know that, you know, you do belong there and that you do have really unique skill sets that are going to be beneficial for your team. I think sometimes it can be hard, especially if you're moving into a work team with people who have many years of experience, to kind of find your place there, and you will notice big gaps in, you know, in what you still have to learn and what skills you need to develop. But having the confidence that you made it there, they hired you, and you're going to fit in. It may take a few months, but that, you know, that is your new job, and to really find your place in your role. And of course, as you're transitioning into your new job, you should use career services and all of the services they have to offer you on resumes, cover letters, mock interviewing, networking, all that.
Look at that graceful plug. I love it. I love it when anybody else can say it and it's not just me. She's right though, Falcons.
One more thing I would quickly add and interject in, McKenna, definitely echo what Allie said. The career services and resources are phenomenal. So definitely check those out if you haven't already. But last thing, kind of echoing what Eric was saying as well, and Allie, just making sure you're advocating for the things you want. And like, so if there's something in your job that, hey, I really wish I was doing more of this, or hey, maybe I don't like this as much, and maybe you have the option or flexibility to adjust those things, maybe you don't, but more often than not, if you say, hey, I really love to learn more about this, your boss is going to be accommodating. So just be upfront and be vocal about what you need and what you want.
Great.
And I have one more small little thing to add as well.
Absolutely.
So I've actually started learning this recently out of school, but I think the hardest part is you're setting goals, right? You're getting, you know, you got your job, great, but you know, how do you kind of keep maintaining that momentum of just kind of like getting things done? I think a lot of it also is just establishing good systems right out of the gate. Like, I think that's what everyone told me when I started school, you know, at River Falls, is, you know, establish good habits right away, I think is so huge. And if there's things that aren't working, try to figure those out early, so then you can kind of just kind of be moving and grooving good during the work days, and then you don't have to stress about that, like about tomorrow. So you just kind of enjoy each day.
That's good advice. Okay, so I'm going to start with Allie on this question because you relocated the farthest. But so Allie's in Washington, D.C. And so for your position, what was the relocation process like in COVID?
Great question. In my ideal world, I would not have had to relocate in a COVID world. It's all those little things that you don't have to think about usually, like, do I have an extra bottle of hand sanitizer for my U-Haul when I drive across the country? All of those fun things to think of. One thing I want to highlight is that to really, and I think this has been mentioned before, but to really advocate for your timeline and what works for you. I think people are understanding of the time that we're in. We're all experiencing it together. And so if, it's probably going to take you a little longer to move if you are driving across the country during COVID. And so making sure when you're setting your start date with HR or your manager, to make sure you're advocating for what works for you in your timeline. I think that was really important for me. I also think, in a sense, COVID actually has some positives for relocation if you're interested in moving somewhere new. Since everything has been virtual, I was able to do job searching from back in Minnesota, which made, I think, the process a lot easier. I was able to do, informational interviews with people out here without having to be in person. I went through the entire hiring process, not being where I am currently. So I think also taking advantage of that. And if you are thinking about moving to a new place, start looking into it, see what connections you have in the area, and take advantage of being virtual right now.
Erica, what about you? You've moved twice.
Yes, I have.
didn't know you were in Chippewa Falls now. I totally thought you were still in St. Cloud. My bad.
Yes, we'll have to, no, you're good. We'll have to catch up afterwards. But yes, there's been lots happening, but none of my moves were nearly as big as Allie's. There were only a couple hours. So it's just something I've never done before. I never really had to move big like that. So just giving yourself grace when lining up, whether it's a U-Haul driver. I was really fortunate, at least the first time, to my company Pioneer in Corteva, they actually had a moving process where they relocated for you. So they came in and boxed everything up and loaded it in the truck and unloaded it. And it was the most seamless thing ever. So if you have the option to do that, 10 out of 10 recommend. It was fantastic, but that did not happen the second time. But it can also honestly be a really nice thing to relocate because it forces you to go through all your things that you've accumulated. But honestly, with COVID, it wasn't a lot different, I guess, for us, other than, like Allie mentioned, the making sure you have the hand sanitizer. And if you do have anybody helping you, making sure if, you want them to wear masks or how they're going to distance or, if they're going to wear gloves, if they're helping you touch stuff, those things can all look a little bit different, but just doing what you're the most comfortable with and what works for everybody else is just big. And definitely echoing what Allie said about the timeline, because there's a lot of things that you don't have control over when it comes to when things are going to be available, when different U-Hauls are going to be available, when people are able to come help you. So just being really open with your manager about all those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Good suggestions. Okay, our last question. Eric, this one's coming to you first. How did you make the switch from a semester/summer mindset that you've had since kindergarten to a consistent work schedule?
So I guess for me, I think what was nice was I finished school and I had kind of like a last hurrah, like day term per se. And then right after Martin Luther King Day in January, I started my job, but it was nice to have a little bit of a break. So if you're fortunate to have some sort of break in between when you start and when you graduate, that is a big plus because you're able to kind of, relax and have a week or two to like not worry about, getting your ducks in a row, and you can just kind of exist and then kind of slowly get everything squared away. That for me was the biggest help for me. And after that, I think everything else I was ready to work. I didn't actually enjoy working. It's kind of weird. And so I was just really excited once I graduated to like start my job. I was like, can I just start right now? But I'm really glad I had the time in between to kind of just recharge, because I definitely had that burnout for sure. So I think if you definitely are feeling that, allow yourself to kind of relax and kind of regroup, because that is a big thing too.
Good advice. Anybody else? Advice on how you changed your mindset?
I'll add on to the taking the time aspect, and taking your time and looking for what you really want. If you can afford to, maybe you live at home for a bit while you job search. COVID certainly makes the job search process a little longer for most people, but really making sure that, it is a big transition, and making sure that you find something that's a good fit for you. It's easy to get in the mindset that you're the one interviewing for all of these jobs and you're the one applying, and that's true. But at the same time, it's also your job to be interviewing the employers and the companies to make sure that's where you want to be working. And it doesn't have to be a permanent job. You don't have to be in that job for the next 30 years of your life, but you will spend a lot of time thinking and working and being with people at your job. So making sure that it really is a good fit for you in the long term.
Great advice.
One more thing that I would add on to, and again, COVID makes things a little bit different than they normally would be, but just really making time for those friends that you may be living a long way away from now. I know, looking back, like there's definitely folks where I'm like, man, I really wish I would have stayed in better contact with them. And I've only been out not even a full year yet. So I know when you're right in the moment, it's hard to imagine, life without seeing these people every day. But just really making a point to say, hey, maybe I need to schedule out a time once a month where we're gonna try to meet up, or maybe that we're gonna get on a phone call, just because those relationships are so important, and you don't want to lose those.
This has been wonderful. All the advice that you have shared today is super helpful. Thanks for your time and being so generous to give us an hour of your time during your work day to talk about what the last year or so has been like for you in the transition. So thanks, everybody.